May the 24th, Feast of Mary Help of Christians. We're in Valdocco. We are together with many pilgrims, and today we notice a novelty in the Valdocco courtyard. The construction site that involves the rooms also affects the whole Pinardi house, including the church of San Francesco. Why? Because the Rector Major and the Council, in the mandate given by General Chapter 27th to better and adequately valorize historical Salesian places, have undertaken to build a large museum, a new Don Bosco House museum, right in the place and in the buildings that Don Bosco himself built over the course of his life to gather the boys here at Valdocco. Don Bosco arrives at Valdocco in the spring of 1846. He leases the Pinardi shed, transforms it into a chapel and inaugurates it on Easter Sunday 1846. But this is the beginning of the oratory, not of the life of Don Bosco here in Valdocco, because in the meantime he is still in his room, the little refuge of the Marquis Barolo that is near here. Immediately after, however, he is so ill that his life is in danger, and for a few months Don Bosco returns to the Becchi at his mother's to recover his good health. Together, in November 1846, they come to the Pinardi house. In November they arrive in the 3 rooms that Don Bosco rented. But the following month, already in December, Don Bosco rents the whole Pinardi house as he realizes that the boys who arrive one after the other don't fit, and he needs the whole house. The house will remain rented to Don Bosco for some years until 1851. At the beginning of 1851, Don Bosco buys the Pinardi house and also buys the land in front, the courtyard, and the land to the right and left of the house. Valdocco is teeming with boys, and it grows continuously, even on the right side of the house of the grounds where there was also Mother Margherita's vegetable garden. In one part of the garden, Don Bosco builds the first oratory, the first building, and this building has different characteristics from the Pinardi house. Casa Pinardi is a simple house, a 2-story house, a house that has no basement, a house that has no dormer windows, nor a usable habitable attic. Instead, the first oratory, which is what we are going through at the moment, in this portico, is a house that changes, has the experience and tradition of the Turin buildings of the center. A large portico, the basement, more floors above ground, in this case 3, and then also the dormers on the attic to be able to use it as a dormitory for the boys. We are in 1854 and Don Bosco builds this first part of the oratory. Then at the center is Pinardi House. On the right, the Church of San Francesco in 1852, the bell tower in 1853, and in 1854 the first oratory. Soon after, we are in 1856, Don Bosco still needs space. What does he do? He completely demolishes the Pinardi house and the shed behind, where there was already no longer a chapel, because there was the Church of San Francesco, that functioned as a church. It had become a study. He demolishes everything and completes the new building, connecting the new oratory of 1854 with the Church of San Francesco of 1852. The building we see in its breadth and length is completed in 1856. In the Pinardi house, Don Bosco manages to accommodate a maximum of 20 boys. In the oratory, he manages to complete 10 years later in 1856. He gets to have 200 boys at home, but the spaces are still not enough. He manages a few years later, in 1860, to buy the Filippi house, which is adjacent and very close to the Pinardi house, the old Pinardi house. And it is exactly in the space that we have behind us and which is now occupied by the library inside the Valdocco courtyard. This building is absolutely not a continuation of the Filippi house. It was completely rebuilt only a few decades ago. But on this site, the Filippi house existed so close to the Pinardi house that by building and expanding the Filippi house, Don Bosco also doubled the building which held the rooms. When he had built it in 1856, it was a single building and he placed his room there. In 1860, he doubles it and moves his own room to this side, which we now see completely covered by the scaffolding of the construction going on. A construction site that we now visit inside, as we'll go down to the basement and then to the upper floors, where there are masons working quickly and in a brisk manner so as to arrive completing everything and inaugurating in April of the next year, 2020. We're in the kitchen of the oratory. The kitchen that was built in 1856, on the space that was exactly the perimeter of the Pinardi house. Don Bosco in 1856 had the Pinardi house completely demolished, and he expanded the oratory, which had already been built in the adjacent section 2 years earlier, with the same construction types. Also in this case, he takes advantage of the space that there is underground, and then the basement is completely used as living spaces. This is the kitchen of the oratory. It is the kitchen from 1856 until 1927, when the new kitchens are built, new dining rooms that are still in operation at Valdocco. This space is very beautiful because, fortunately, as Salesians, we have never converted it to other uses. So it was, as has remained, as we see it. We are already starting. The renovations have already begun, at least in the vault of the ceiling of this beautiful room, and of note are the 3 kitchen support areas. To my right is the pantry below the courtyard of Valdocco and of the Pinardi house. The pantry is how we found and left it in 1927. Hence, again with the terracotta surfaces and how it was, so it has remained. We shall restore it so it is visible. The second interesting element is important instead for those who know the Pinardi house, the well. We remember and know that there is a fountain on the courtyard, but the fountain from which the boys drew water and with which they often soaked bread for a snack, because it was dry, was not a fountain connected to the aqueduct. There was no aqueduct at the time. It was a pump-actioned fountain that drew water from a well below. This is the well. It's 20 meters deep. It is the old well of the Pinardi house that still works. If we throw down a bucket and pull it up, water comes up. This too will be restored and fixed, and it is perfectly connected to the kitchen. This room was the place of water, the sink. The third instrument of work in a kitchen, the oven. The oven for bread. This too will be restored, and it is significant that the oven that heats was separated from the pantry by the well space. So the oven heat would not go to contaminate the foods that were stored in the pantry. Next to the kitchen there was the room for handling and delivering food, because in the kitchen then, as now, one never enters. Even the boys who serve as waiters never pass in the kitchen. There is always a space of connection between the dining rooms and the kitchen. And it is this small room adjacent to the kitchen which is also being restored. A gem, a detail of this room, is that little pulley that can be seen on the ceiling. Let us remember, when Don Bosco arrives at Valdocco, in the Pinardi house, which is not this one because it is the one he later demolished, is rebuilt with this building, but when he arrives with Mother Margherita, the first boy Don Bosco welcomes, Mama Margherita says, "But where do we put this lad, for we have no space?" And Don Bosco's answer is, "We put him in the bread basket, he's so small." The bread basket at the time, remember that bread in Turin were the stretched Turin breadsticks, so that the elongated bread on very horizontal baskets was then raised with a small pulley so that at night the mice could not eat the bread. Adjacent to the oratory's kitchen there are the refectories. The boys' refectory, the Salesians' refectory, the novices' refectory, the refectory of the brothers who served the food and who prepared the food. Let us remember that in the oratory of Don Bosco there are no nuns who arrive in Valdocco in 1927, when the new kitchens are built. We are now moving towards the refectory of the boys, which is exactly under the church of San Francesco di Sales. To get there, we also encounter the space in which there was the staircase inside the bell tower of the church that connected the basement, the kitchen floor, the dining rooms up to the former floor, that to the bedrooms above the second floor. Above this arch, which was later built by interrupting the staircase and then eliminating the one from this floor, we still see it on the upper floors. The small ladder that Mother Margaret climbed every day, that San Domenico Savio walked, that Don Bosco Don Rua walked. The first of the oratory, this staircase, they did it every day uphill and downhill. This is instead, as I was saying before, the dining room space. The refectory of the boys that is exactly under the space of the church of San Francesco di Sales, and which is built in the moment in which the church is built, that is in 1852. It is the first building that Don Bosco builds, and he immediately thinks of a very large space below, in view of the boys who will grow up here in Valdocco. They are interesting, and there are two nice remnants of stairs that allow the boys to access the refectory from the courtyards. So one did not enter the refectory from the main staircase of the house because there were no internal corridors, and however they were very small for the number of boys, but it was accessed either from this or from this room, in which there was a very steep staircase, in which we note only at this moment the handrail, because it was later eliminated. There is still the handrail that tells us how quickly and steeply one went down into the refectory, and on the opposite side the second staircase that was still the access from the courtyard to the refectory. One was the stairs of the craftsmen, one was the stairs of the students. We do not know which of the two were of the craftsmen or students. However, in this room they met for lunch. And in this space the refectory was also a small theatre for when there were events for some shows for the holidays. Then, in the area of the apse, the theatre would be temporarily set up, when there were no other spaces. In the restoration, this building will become the presentation of Marian devotion in the various facets of Don Bosco's charism, which will be object of presentation throughout the Pinardi house, throughout the house of Don Bosco's origins.